Alright, good afternoon everyone. My name is Benjamin and welcome to our swing state analysis, and today we're talking about Minnesota, a state that I have been dreading covering for about a week. And remember, if you like the content, likes, comments, subscriptions, they really do help because algorithm reasons. Just as a friendly favor that I want to ask of anyone, please don't spam the comments with potential matchups to cover. I have a plan for my content for the next couple of weeks, so I won't be able to get to them for at least that long, and because I'm in 2020 mode, I'm not really looking into going further into the future than that. And specific Senate races I may cover, I do have a few planned, but yeah. I'd also like to, just as a little aside, make sure that if you're commenting in the comments saying that, oh, Biden is 100% going to win or Trump is going to crush or landslide, no, please don't. Because at the end of the day, none of us really knows exactly what's going to happen. I'm doing my best to make an educated guess on all of this based off of the past, the current political environment, which unfortunately we're going to have to talk about something, and a few, and what we know about the state's partisanship, as well as looking at polling. And currently the polling does indicate Biden has an advantage nationally and in a few of the swing states. However, interestingly enough, most polls that will look at it nationally, they'll oversample the swing states and then weight them accordingly when they do their national polling, but they'll say something along the lines of what the result in those swing state samples were. And all of the credible ones that have done it have shown that Trump does better in the swing states, even significantly so, than he does nationally. There was one CNBC or CNN poll that found that while Trump was losing by 6% nationally, he was winning by 7% in the swing states, which were the states that were within 8%. And I actually did the math for that, and in 2016, Donald Trump, out of the two-party share, won by about 3%. It was a little bit less than that. So that means that the swing states have moved further to the right if this polling is 100% correct, and I'd like to see more like this before I make before I actually make that call. But if that polling is correct, and by the way, don't pick and choose when to believe polls and when not to. Have a general rule that yes, for the most part, polls can be believable, but always look at the crosstabs to understand how they did it and understand how they weighted their data, how they looked at their data, look at the internal numbers, look at, okay, Trump's winning this many white people, this many, so on and so forth. And mostly so forth. If this is correct, that means the swing states have moved further to the right, whereas the rest of the nation has moved left. And it means that they're weighting populations in places like urban California, urban New York, a lot more heavily on their national model than they are, than they probably should be. Because if Donald Trump's winning the swing states by about 7%, you'd actually expect him to be winning the national vote by about 1, maybe 2 points. Maybe 3. So, which number is wrong is the question that's going to get brought up, and I don't think either of them are necessarily wrong. They may be off by a couple of percent, but that's captured within a margin of error. And the other problem I think people make with that is when you look at the margin of error for a poll, and I know I'm actually going to get to Minnesota here in just a second. When you get to the margin of error, a lot of people think, oh, that means that anything within that margin of error is a competitive race, when that's wrong. A margin of error means is that all numbers within a data set or all top line results could be off by that much in both directions. So a 3.5% margin of error. By the way, most polls with a margin of error under 4.5% are considered credible. So that actually equates to allowing for up to a 9% swing. And that should worry people. Because if your poll winds up actually being off by your margin of error, and it's 4.5%, and both numbers are off, let's say it shows Trump losing by 8% in, say, Minnesota, for example, in your poll, and Trump winds up winning by 1%. That's technically within the margin of error. And if you're using that poll as a way to figure out where to campaign, if, say, you're the Biden team, and you decided not to spend any money in Minnesota because that poll was close enough to the average, and the average had, was showing that you were winning by like 5 or 6, and the average margin of error wound up being about 7%, and you decided, we'll put a little bit of money in here, but we don't need to visit the state, we don't need to put a ton of effort, this is a pretty comfortable state for us. And then all of a sudden Donald Trump wins by 1 point, and you're like, what just happened? Well, this is exactly what happened in Michigan, where the average of polls showed that Donald Trump was behind by about 6%, and he winds up winning by, I think, 1% maybe. So, while technically within the margin of error, it was a huge shock to the vast majority of election viewers, because, well, he wasn't supposed to be able to win that state. He was so far behind. And Wisconsin, too, was in a similar boat. Similar thing with Pennsylvania. And at this point, you can understand why a lot of people are skeptical of polls, when the reality is most people don't 100% get what actually everything in the polls actually mean. Now, let's actually talk a little bit about Minnesota. And I'm not going to jump to any conclusions regarding the electoral or political ramifications of any riots, any protests, any events that have been going on in the state, because at the end of the day, nobody knows exactly what's going to happen. There are credible arguments that this will help the Democrats. There are credible arguments that this will help the Republicans. It's much less clear-cut than in Michigan, in my opinion, because in Michigan, the protests were against a very specific person. And yes, while not all Michiganders are in favor of the protests against the lockdowns, I think it reflects an attitude overall that people are sick and tired of this lockdown. Okay. Anyway, Minnesota, historically speaking, has been a very Democratic state. It's voted Democratic at the presidential level since 1972, when Nixon won every state but Massachusetts. It voted for Walter Mondale in 1984, despite it, now it was within about 3,000 votes. So Reagan came extremely close to actually getting a 50-state sweep. And Bush the second came close one or two, both times, to winning Minnesota, but it was still a few percent off. And then, of course, Trump actually came close in 2016, losing by about 1.6%, meaning the state actually voted more Republican than the nation as a whole. And that kind of mirrors a shift that has been going on in the rest of the Rust Belt, where these were once reliably Democratic states, and the Republicans have made significant gains in them. Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania being the notable examples, but Iowa and Ohio also voting overwhelmingly for Republicans since 2010. I think that goes to show that this is an area that is undergoing political flux, similar to how the South and Southwest, as well as Texas, have been undergoing a shift towards the Democrats. I think it's a little bit unreasonable to say that this is an area that is incapable of continuing to vote for Republicans. And the reality is that Minnesota has Minneapolis and St. Paul, and those are the blue areas, maybe one or two its suburbs. And they've got the Iron Range, which is not as strong of a Democratic area as I think a lot of Democrats and Democratic strategists want to believe. I think all but the county with Duluth, this county right here, I'll just flip it real quick. I think all but that were extremely close in 2016, if I remember correctly. So it is possible for Republicans to win that state. I think all they have to do is win that county, and they can actually carry the state. Now, if they win that county, they're likely going to get both of the other Iron Range counties, but still. So Minnesota, definitely a swing state to keep your eye on, and this election is going to be a close one. If you're predicting a landslide, I have a bridge to sell you. I'm slightly kidding there. There are reasons to believe that this could be a landslide, but I think historically speaking, and with the amount of partisanship and polarization in this nation, as well as the fact that Donald Trump probably has a floor of about 45%, it's more than likely going to be close. Anyway, I want to thank everyone for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I'll see y'all next time. Take it easy. Bye-bye.